Hey Greg, welcome back to another Deck Tech. Now imagine if your name was Greg. But anyway, everyone, welcome back to another Deck Tech. Today we are looking at the Wise Mothman. The Wise Mothman is a Sultai 1/3/3 insect mutant with flying. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter, and then whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a 1/1 counter on up to each X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. So this is just a Mothman mill. So I play him. Rad counters are super cool and unique. You just mill out opponents and they take passive damage. Also, love Fallout just as a franchise. So I think rad counters are really neat. I'm also a little bit biased because I like Fallout a lot. But anyway, rad counters are a great way to hit each opponent without combat. Since he's constantly milling, you're consistently making himself bigger by giving spare counters to your other creatures, but with a primary focus on him. And then milling yourself doesn't really matter because we're Sultai, and Sultai doesn't really mind that. So here's the game plan. We don't need him to win, but he's definitely very good because just on the ETB and attack of the rad counters is great. Early game, we're just going to get down some rocks, ramps, really get as much mana as we can. Maybe some smaller creatures that benefit early game. Mid game, we're just like turn 4 or 5. We're going to want to play Mothman, and just so we can start racking up rad counters. The cool thing with Mothman is like if he dies or gets countered, it's really not that big of a deal because we'll recast him and we're just going to do casual milling without him anyways. And then late game, we're going to profit off all of the rad counters that all of our other cards are going to give. They're going to drain our opponents by just a lot of life. They're going to lose resources by putting their cards in the grave. And then we're going to make our own creatures huge. Vulnerabilities, we got Farewell, particularly as a board wipe. Farewell, just exiling graveyards sucks for us. Also just exiling creatures or artifacts. And enchantments isn't really super big, but we got a decent amount of creatures. We need our creatures to live. I mean, end of the day, we're beat down. And then counter hate. Not specifically like counter spells. We don't like them definitely, but solemnity type effects where players can't get counters. Like we're working with rad counters, which puts counters on the player. So we're really going to want them to not have solemnity on the field. The deck doesn't have a ton of like really main vulnerabilities. Just because Sultai is very versatile, like things go to the grave, we can get them back, things like that. But I think Solemnity and Farewell type effects are just, they hurt us. Channel stuff. So when I made the deck, it cost about $421. You can get the cards from the link down below, and just like, comment, and subscribe to the channel to really support the channel. Going into it, we have Ashiok. Ashiok just makes our opponent not be able to search their library, which is just kind of fun hate. Not necessarily the best, but it's just fun hate. So the main reason we're using him is target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard, then exile each opponent's graveyard. So we as a Sultai deck can kind of get some benefit from our graveyard. The issue with playing a mill deck in Commander is if one of our opponents are also milling or reanimating or whatever, we don't want to accidentally enable them. So the idea is we can make someone like let's say the reanimator deck, right? Mill 4 cards, so they lose 4 cards, and then exile everyone's graveyard. We really just want the graveyard exile just to prevent our milling from incidentally helping someone. So Vraska is really good just as a whole in the deck. Doesn't matter if you complete it or not. We're mainly running her just for the 0 and the 2. You can really ignore the 9 effect. That's really never going to happen, and if it does, cool, but we're not going to count on it. Proliferate, draw a card, you lose a life. That's great because it's card advantage for us. It puts another loyalty counter on her, and it also proliferates all of the rad counters on everyone. So it makes them mill a little bit more and take a little bit more. And then also just having target creature become an artifact with, just becomes an artifact that is a treasure. It's good because it's almost permanent removal, if that makes sense. So let's say someone has like, it can be awkward because you can have, let's say, like an O-ring type effect that can get rid of like someone's commander, or Song of the Dryades is a good example, right? Song of the Dryades is good because it just makes your opponent's creature a forest. But again, it's hard to get rid of, but if they get rid of the enchantment, then the creature's back online. The nice thing about Vraska is like, it's just a treasure. The only way it's not going to be a treasure is by sacking it. So we just get rid of a problematic creature. Going into creatures, we have Frank Horrigan. He is a 8/6 with trample, indestructible as long as he attacked, but the main reason we're running him is when he enters the battlefield or attacks, proliferate twice. So again, he enters, proliferate, go to combat on our turn, proliferate. He's also an indestructible 8/6 trampler. Sounds good to me. Bloatfly Swarm, 4 mana, essentially a 5/5 with flying. If damage would be dealt to it, remove a counter from it, that many counters from it, and then give each player a rad counter for each 1/1 removed. We have so many proliferate effects. This guy is most likely not gonna die super easy unless he gets like hard killed spelled. So he's a great blocker. No one wants to deal with it. Corpse Jack Menace with the nice Vault 22 Spore People. If 1 or more 1/1 counters will be put on a creature you control, twice that many 1/1 counters are put on it instead. So Bloatfly Swarm now enters with 10 1/1 counters, for an example. Dolphin Voidwalker is another one of the kind of graveyard hate that we want to add because we don't want people really benefiting off of it. So one more milling, where those cards are just going to go to exile, and then we can just kind of take the best card. Let's say someone mills something really nice, say like a Bolas of Citadel or like a cool Eldrazi or whatever. We can just take it for ourselves for free. Feral Ghoul is really nice because, again, the whole idea of the deck is putting counters on Mothman and our other guys. So he's a 2/2. Whenever another creature we control dies, put a 1/1 on him, and then whenever he dies, each opponent gets rad counters equal to its power. So looking at him in a vacuum, he enters the battlefield, dies instantly, let's say from a kill spell. Each opponent gets 2 rad counters for 3 mana, which really isn't even that bad. Glowing One is very awkward to deal with when he enters, but when he deals combat damage to a player, they get 4 rad counters, which is a good chunk. He has Death Touch, so no one really wants to trade with like a 2/2 on that. And then whenever a player mills a non-land card, we gain a life. So we're not really worried about hurting ourselves too much with our like rad counters affecting us. Hancock Ghoulish Mare, he has Undying as a 2/1 zombie mutant advisor. Each other creature you control that is a zombie or a mutant gets +X/+X, where X is the number of counters on him. So, cool thing, he has Undying, he'll put a counter on himself. Also, he is a mutant. A lot of cards in our deck are mutants. Even looking at the Infesting Radroach and Jason Bright, they're also mutants. Mothman's a mutant. We got a lot of mutants. So just by putting counters on him, using, let's say, Mothman's effect, it really makes all of our other guys stronger too, which is very nice. So, Infesting Radroach. Can't block. When it deals combat damage to a player, they get that many rad counters, and then whenever an opponent mills a non-land card, if it's in our grave, we can put it back on our hand. So this cockroach is never going away. Jason Bright Glowing Prophet. Whenever a zombie or a mutant you control dies, if its power was different from its base power, draw a card. The only way in my head that we're really going to have the power be different is by putting 1/1 counters. So in the way I'm looking at this guy is, whenever our creatures die, if it has a counter on it, draw a card. We can also sacrifice a creature to put a 1/1 counter on something and give it flying, which is nice, which is effectively pay 2, sacrifice a creature, draw a card, and then put a 1/1 counter on a creature and give it flying. I like that part a lot. This guy is just not really on flavor at all with Fallout. We got Kodama of the West Tree. The reason we're running him is modified creatures you control have trample. Since our guys have counters on them, they're now modified. Whenever a modified creature you control deals combat damage to a player, search your deck for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped. He's great because he's a 3/3 for 3 with reach, which is also fine. He makes all of our guys with counter on them have trample, and then when they deal combat damage to a player, we get lands from our deck to the field tapped, which is also great. Lily Bowing Raging Grandma. I love Lily. I just played Fallout New Vegas recently. I played a lot of the Fallouts recently, seeing these cards, and she was my companion for a while because I was a melee build. She is a 4 mana Vigilance 0/0. When she enters the battlefield, you put 2 1/1 counters on them. At the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on Lily if its power is 16 or less. Otherwise, remove all but 1 1/1 counter from it, then you gain 1 life for each 1/1 counter removed this way. So she's very cool because we can just passive. One, she's going to double her counters all the time anyways. 2, Mothman's going to put counters on her just from simply existing and people milling, which is really cool. I like that a lot. Mirelurk Queen, 5 mana 4/4. I actually love this card. When it enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. So just right away we get instant value. And then whenever 1 or more non-land cards are milled, draw a card, then put a 1/1 counter on it, but the ability only triggers once each turn. The nice thing about this is rad counters affect each player during their turn. So even just casually using Mothman, the idea with this card is if everyone has rad counters, assuming they mill like a non-land, we're gonna draw a card and then put a 1/1 counter on it, which makes it even bigger, which makes it even better, and it's got vigilance. Muldrotha, it's really just since we're milling, we want to be able to not lose the value of the cards we have. We want to be able to play those permanents from our grave, and you really just got our creatures back. Nightkin Ambusher. We have a 4-mana 4/4 with Ward 2. When it enters the battlefield, target player gets 4 rad counters, and it can't be blocked as long as the defending player has a rad counter. This card's great. I mean, honestly, just giving 4 rad counters for 4 mana is really good. It has protection, just as Ward 2, and it can't be blocked, which is pretty much a consistent 4 damage, but since we're putting 1/1 counters on it, it's going to be even more. Rampaging Yao Guai is an awkward card for the deck just because it's green, 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 and then X. It's just awkward mana colors. But at face value, it's at least a 2/2 for 3 mana, worst case, with Vigilance and Trample. It enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it, and then when it enters the battlefield, destroy any number of target artifacts and or enchantments with total mana value X or less. So the cool thing about this is it destroys all tokens. No more treasures exist with this guy. It destroys, like, soul rings. It gets really good, right? And it only gets better. So like late game, like we can just nuke all artifacts and enchantments we don't control effectively, or at least most of the problematic ones we don't like. But all the tokens are just 0, so they don't count. So we just get rid of them too. Raoul, Troubleshooter. Raoul is a 1/4. Once during each of your turn, you may cast a spell from among cards in your graveyard that were milled this turn. So if we have our own rad counters mill us, we can still cast them, and then we can have each player mill a card, which is going to trigger Mothman because everyone milled a card, and it's also going to let us have, basically, the way I look at it is basically says draw a card, essentially, because we can cast that card anyway. Whatever. Screeching Scorchbeast is a 6-mana 5/5 flying menace. When it attacks, each player gets 2 rad counters. Whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, you may create that many 2/2 black zombie mutant creature tokens, and you only do it once each turn. So the idea with this is we just get a bunch of 2/2s every turn, right? Raoul helps with that because it makes everyone mill a card. There's a lot of synergy with Screeching Scorchbeast. Spark Double, I'm using this as effectively another copy of Mothman, just because having 2 Mothmans and doubling up rad counters and doubling up mill is really good, and it also doubles up our counters. I think it's good. Strong Brutish Thespian is a 6-mana 7/7 with Ward 2. He also has Enrage. Whenever he's dealt damage, you get 3 rad counters and put 3 1/1s on him, and then we gain life instead of rather losing life from rad counters. So it's another thing where rad counters don't negatively affect us, and, like, you know, he's a great blocker. He's got Ward 2, so he's annoying to target, and he's 7/7. Pretty good to me. Sir Conrad is very good for this deck, just because it's whenever a creature dies or is effectively milled or whatever, he deals 1 damage to each opponent, so he effectively kind of doubles up rad counters and milling effects for creatures. Like, basically, creatures now take an extra, or opponents take an extra damage, which is good because it's also from us and from our opponents. And then we can have each player mill a card just for 2 on a stick. Tato Farmer, I love this card so much. I think his art's really funny. I think his flavor text is really funny. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may get 2 rad counters. We probably won't, but honestly we could. It doesn't matter. But put target land card from a graveyard that was basically milled this turn on the battlefield tapped under your control. The idea is, okay, Mothman triggers, right? Let's say turn 3 you play him, turn 4 Mothman triggers. We go to our opponent, they get a rad counter, they mill a land card. We'll just tap them. That's our land now. It's just ramp every turn. The Master Transcendent Master, the Master Transcendent, I'm thinking of other cards, was actually the other commander I was thinking to make this deck, just because I think he's so good. He enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters, and then we can tap him to put a creature card that was milled on our battlefield, and it's a 3/3 mutant. Which I like. It's pretty good. I think he's really neat. We just get a lot of guys. Vexing Radgal is a 2-mana 1/2 is what I meant to say. Flying, when it deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 rad counters. If they don't have any rad counters, otherwise proliferate. In my head, he's better Thrumming Bird. That's exactly how I look at him, is he's better Thrumming Bird. And then Whining Constrictor. If 1 or more counters would be placed on an artifact or creature we control, that many of those counters plus 1 are placed on that permanent. And then if you would get 1 or more counters, you get that many plus 1 counters. So we don't really mind milling ourselves too much. But he does double up, like, so it's kind of like we get benefit from milling just because we have so many mill effects like Screeching Scorch Beast and yada yada yada. So we don't mind getting milled ourselves. But he also makes all of our like Mothman triggers of putting counters on things add 1 extra counter, which is very nice too. And then the final one we have is Young Deathclaws for a 4 mana 4/2 with a menace. Each creature in your graveyard has Scavenge. The Scavenge cost is equal to its mana cost. Scavenge is just exile a creature card from your graveyard. You put X 1/1 counters on a target creature you control, where X is that creature's power, but you can only do it on as a sorcery. I like this card for late game because we can just like get rid of some guy in our grave and then put like a ton of counters on Mothman or whatever, or any of our other guys, and then beat in for a lot. Going into sorceries, we have Breach of the Multiverse. We have so many mill effects that like are good, like cards that care about milling and stuff, that it kind of is like a double whammy. Like Sir Conrad, for example, is really good with this. But 7 mana to have each player mill 10, and then for each creature, we get the best creature or planeswalker card that was like in their graveyard, not just milled that way, that was in their graveyard, and then we get it. So in my head, in a pod of 4, including you get 4 of the best, you get the 4 best creatures or planeswalkers in players' graveyards, and then you get all of the extra mill effects from all of our other guys. Casualties of War, I just really like the art. I really like the flavor text. It's also a good card. There could be better things, but I do want to say now is that when I made this deck, I wanted to add a lot of the cards that were already in the pre-con, just because I don't want to have too many changes to this deck, just because I want this to be more of a casual primer than really anything competitive. The deck's still good in my opinion, but you know, you're not like crushing local game stores with it. Do a little bit of modification, you'll get there. Casualties of War is one of those cards where I really like. I think it's good, but there are better options. Just for 6 mana, you get to pop an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, and planeswalker. 5 things for 6 mana is really good, and I like that a lot. Cultivate is really just ramp. I put Cultivate in almost all of my green decks that are multicolored just because you get 2 lands, 1 to the field tap, so it's ramp, and then you don't miss your land drop the next turn. I really like. Harmonize is, again, one of those cards where you probably could add better things, but I do like the art, the flavor text. It's in the Fallout pre-con, so you don't have to worry too much with the upgrades, and 3 or 4 mana to draw 3 cards is really good. Kodama's Reach is the same logic as Cultivate. Nature's Lore is just to search our deck for a shock land or a triumph, put it in the battlefield tapped, or if we just want to have 1 mana ramp, we can just get a basic forest untapped, and then, again, it's really only cost, Nature's Lore effectively costs 1 mana at that point. Nuclear Fallout, X, black, each creature gets twice -X until end of turn. Each player gets X rad counters. So I think it's a good nuke, just so we can still deal, it's basically a nuke in my head that deals lasting damage and like extra mill. So even let's say X is 5, right? In my head, the nuke, like, it's gonna probably hurt us, but even if X is 5, I think we could get Mothman with like 1/1 counters to be above a 10/10. Because even if you play Mothman on turn 4 and then each player mills a rad counter, like gets away a rad counter and mills like a non-land, Mothman's now a 7/7 just because it made 1 rotation around the board. So Mothman being above, let's say X is 10, is very easy, and then having each player get 5 rad counters to make the milling and the damage even more is great. Reanimate, since we're a mill deck, we just want to get the best creature, put it on the graveyard under our control for 1 mana. We can lose life, doesn't really matter too much. But even like just seeing, like, let's say early game or late game, someone mills something we really like we can just steal it. It's just ours now. We'll lose a lot of life for it, but who cares? And 3 visits is the same thing as Nature Lore, literally identical. Instance Atomize is one of my favorite cards from the set. I just think it's so good. Destroy target non-land permanent and then proliferate. So we get rid of something we don't like on the board, and we give everyone a rad counter, and we make all of our boys even bigger. Sounds good to me. Contaminated Drink, I think, is super sick because it's draw with not a ton of like bad side, like rad counters aren't really bad for us. If anything, they help us because they're going to trigger Mothman. So it's draw X cards and then you get half X rad counters. So even if we draw let's say we just do 4, right? We 6 mana, draw 4 cards at instant speed and get 2 rad counters is like great. That's fine with me. Counterspell is a counterspell, just so we can stay a little bit in control, have some interaction. Drown in the Lock, since we're milling a lot, everyone kind of works for each opponent. Just like in my head, Drown in the Lock isn't super great in Commander just because mill decks primarily focus on 1 person. But Mothman's nice because it equally affects everyone. So we can counter their spell or we can destroy their creature. Experimental Augury I like just so we can, I just think it's good interaction and instant speed. It's a budget card. We proliferate for 2 mana, and then we just look at the top 3 cards of our deck and we get the best one. Sounds good to me. Inspiring Call is kind of like a anti-destroy all creature card for us. Draw a card for each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it, and then they get indestructible. So even if it's not for like a board wipe, it's a good combat trick. We draw a lot of cards off of it, and our guys are protected, so I'm stoked on it. The final 2 cards are Mutational Advantage, which I think this card is like so insanely good. I want it for like my decks. Like I have like 2 decks instantly when I saw this card. Like I have a Planeswalker deck and I have a 1/1 counter deck, and like, ooh, this card's so good for it. Permanents you control with counters on them gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to those permanents this turn, and then you proliferate, which is so good at instant speed. And plus, I like the flavor text in the art. It's funny. And then Putrefy, it's not the best card. I'll say Assassin's Trophy is better, but I do want to keep the precon kind of similar, and I really like the art. I think it's really cool, and Putrefy, you know, it's not bad. It's not bad. Pop an artifact or creature, can't be regenerated, it's fine. Going into artifacts, we have Agatha's Soul Cauldron. 2 mana, you may spend mana as though it were mana of, you know, whatever activated abilities, you guys know it. The main reason I'm running Agatha is so we can tap it, exile a card from a graveyard, and then that puts a 1/1 counter on our guys. Just because we're milling, we're not always going to have anti-graveyard cards. So Agatha's Soul Cauldron is just targeted removal for issues in graveyards. That also puts counters on our guys. That also makes all of our guys have cool abilities of cards exiled, you know, with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Like, for example, let's say Llanowar Elves. Like, someone blocks, or we mill a Llanowar Elf, someone blocks it, it goes to the graveyard. We can exile with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, put a 1/1 counter, let's say on Mothman, and now all of our guys tap for green. It gets even better. I like it. Then we have Arcane Signet. It's just a mana rock, it's fine. Crucible of Worlds is just so we don't miss land drops in case we mill any lands. We're not have to worry about it. Lightning Greaves is just to protect Mothman. Again, we don't need Mothman to like win, but I do like having Mothman around. Plus it lets Mothman enter the battlefield, give everyone a rad counter, attack, give everyone a rad counter. I like it. Nuke Launcher. I think this card's interesting. I don't know how I feel about it though. It is a 2 mana equipment for equip 3. Equip creature has +3/+0 and has Intimidate. Whenever equipped creature attacks until the end of turn, the defending player's next turn, whenever they cast a spell, they get 2 rad counters. In my head, this really is annoying for like spell singing decks. It's good for combo decks. It's just good for, you know, even players like doing like multiple things. Let's say it's like small mana or big weenies tokens or whatever. Like people going nuts. It happens like more often than you think, because when you have cards like Guardian Project or like whatever that keeps enabling and drawing cards, in my head, people getting like a lot of rad counters is good. Ozlith the Shattered Spire is really just another counter doubler. Not doubler, but it adds an extra counter to it. And then we can pay 2 mana, just put a 1/1 counter on our guys, which is really pay 2 mana, put 2 1/1 counters on an artifact or creature. It's only as a sorcery, which sucks. And then for some reason, this card has cycling. I'm not one to complain about it. I just think it's weird, but it's also really good. So, Soul Ring is Soul Ring. We run all of the Talismans of Curiosity, Dominance, just because they're good. I'm kind of preferring them more to Signets nowadays. And then finally, we have the Ozlith, which is, I love this card. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, not dies, not gets exiled, just leaves. It's no longer there. If it had counters, put those counters on the Ozlith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozlith has counters, you may move all of those counters from the Ozlith on the target creature. So we can just make one of our guys like absolutely huge, which I think is super cool. And it's like consistent. And if someone wants to get rid of our 1 mana artifact, that's fine too. Going into enchantments, Bloodchief Ascension is so insanely good for this deck. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life, which really means they had 2 rad counters and they milled 2 non-lands or whatever, put a quest counter on it. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters, again, we can also proliferate these counters if need be. You may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. So the way this card now reads is anytime an opponent uses a rad counter and like mills a non-land card, they now take 3 life and we gain 2 life. If they mill a land and they now take 2 and we gain 2. Card's so good. Branching evolution is to double the counters we put on creatures. I know we have cards like I just said, the Ozolith, that just adds like 1 extra woman counter. Branching evolution puts twice that many counters, so it's literally double. Guardian Project, just so it has whenever non-token creature enters, we draw a card. We want to stay consistent. Hardened Scales is again just kind of like the Ozolith Shattered Spire. It's just an extra counter when you put 1. Inexorable Tide, whenever we cast a spell, proliferate. So ideally, no one's ever going to run out of rad counters, or at least our opponents are never going to run out of rad counters, just because we can always proliferate them. And the logic behind this is, I think our opponents, each player has a, let's say, a 1 in 3 chance of keeping their rad counter. Because my logic is, okay, when you build a commander deck, 33% of its lands, 33% of its creatures, 33% of its whatever, right? Doesn't matter. So in my head, when you have like really more than 33% of it being land, it's likely that they're going to keep that rad counter. So we'll be able to proliferate it. Struggle for Project Purity. Brotherhood is good, but the main reason I want it is just for Enclave. Whenever a player attacks you with 1 or more creatures, they get that many rad, or twice that many rad counters. It's just a huge incentive for them not to attack us, which is fine with me. Brotherhood's like also okay, like if we need a lot of card draw. But we also don't want to enable our opponents with more card draw, which is awkward. Our final 2 enchantments, we have Vault 12 Necropolis. Each player gets 3 rad counters. Already like it. Create X 2/2 black zombie mutants, or X is a number of rad counters. Even better. That's probably, I would say, you know, rough numbers. I'd say we probably get at least 6 to 9 zombies off that. And then we put 2 1/1 counters on each creature that is a zombie or a mutant. Most of the deck is mutants. We have a lot of zombies, so it's good for me. And plus, they'll be able to attack that turn. So all of those 2/2s are now 4/4s. Then we have Forced Evolution from Vault 87. Gain control of target non-mutant for as long as you have it. Put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control. It just becomes a mutant. And then we draw cards equal to the greatest power among mutants. Most likely that mutant's going to be Mothman, just because Mothman's so big. And it gets big so easy. It's just good card draw. We just steal a creature for 3 turns our opponent. It's just annoying for them. I like it. Going into lands, I didn't change a lot of the lands from the pre-con, just because I thought the land base was fine, and, you know, people can, like, I think everyone has their own preferred way of, like, adding lands. So, like, when I do it, I like to add all the shock lands. I like to add all the check lands. The temple lands were already included in the deck list, which I thought was fine. And then going into the lands, like Command Tower is Command Tower, it's good. Evolving Wilds was just in the pre-con. Plus, I think it's fine when we have cards like Crucible of Worlds or whatever, it's fine. Just for a pre-con upgrade. Exotic Orchard, the likelihood that someone else in your pod of 4, so 3 opponents, is playing blue, black, or green, is pretty high. So it's usually going to be an untapped, like, dual land. Mariposa Military Base is cool. When it enters the battlefield, you can get 2 rad counters if you feel like it. You just get a colorless, or you can pay 5 to draw a card, but that ability costs less for each rad counter you control. So in my head, I don't think us getting 2 rad counters is good, just because we're always going to passively have rad counters, just because they usually spread around. So in my head, it's like, best case, this lane just taps to draw a card for free, which I like. Nesting Ground, we move a counter from target permanent you control onto another target permanent, activate it only as a sorcery. It's just if we want something to be a little bit bigger. If we want to change away counters, let's say a good example for this is Hancock. Let's say he died with Undying, right? We can now remove that +1/+1 counter from him, so if he dies again, he'll come back with Undying. Is a good example for it. It's just to, you know, have fun with. Opulent Palace, it's just a tap land that taps for all of our colors. I think it's okay. Path of Ancestry, Mothman's an insect and a mutant. We have a lot of mutants, so our mutants scry. Sunken Hollow is in the pre-con. I think it's a good land. We have the Tainted Lands, a Tainted Isle, and Tainted Wood. They're fine. They're just like weird duels. And then our final, like, non-basic is just Zagoth Triumph, just because it's taps for all of our colors. We can fetch it if we want, and it has cycling if need be, which is also really good. Going into the lands, we have 6 forests, 5 islands, and 5 swamps. I think that totals us to be about 36 lands or so, if I'm right. Which I think is fine. We so many options. So it's fine. 36 lands is good. That's all I got for you guys. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. And if you need any cards from TCG Player, check out the link down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.